All right, y'all. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hang on just a second. There we go. Okay. I've just muted you all. It's not personal, but I hope you can still hear me. Right. Okay. So I join you from home today because as of this week, we have moved to all virtual, which includes Sunday morning worship. So if you join us for Sunday morning worship after this, all of that has been pre-recorded. It's really the first time since the beginning of COVID, since, that we've done that. But we made that move, made that decision last week, just with the rising numbers, and just felt like the wisest and safest thing to do at this point. So that is why I join you from home. It's also why if you hear a little bit of my child's background, I've stuck him in front of the TV so that I can be present with y'all. So if you hear a little bit of the itsy bitsy spider, that's where that's coming from. And I've asked Elizabeth to lead y'all in Lectio in a few minutes because that would probably be rather challenging to do with him. And she has graciously agreed. So thank you, Elizabeth. Before we do that, though, I want to introduce our guest speaker again. I think most of you were with us last week, but in case some of you were not, Dr. Axia Marchand is the assistant professor of psychology at Rhodes College. And there she teaches educational psychology, statistics, and research methods. Her research focuses on how Black parents make sense of educational inequities and how that relates to their engagement with their children's schools. She gave us part one of her presentation last week, which was wonderful. And she is back with us today to give us part two. So in a moment, we're going to turn it over to her. We are grateful, Axia. Thank you so much for being back with us today. But before we go any farther, we're going to begin with Lectio Divina, as we always do. And I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
All right. Going to share my screen with y'all. All right. So as we usually do, we have a bit of scripture and some contemporary wisdom. So I'm going to read both of these and then invite you to take a minute to reflect on a word or phrase that is speaking to you this morning. As we work together with him, we urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. For he says, "At an acceptable time, I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation, I have helped you. See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation." From 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 2. Looking closely at the present you are constructing. Look closely at the present you are constructing. It should look like the future you are dreaming. Alice Walker. I'm going to give you a minute to reflect on those. All right, using the chat feature, I invite you to share a word or phrase that is speaking to you this morning. At an acceptable time, I have listened to you. Work together. Now. See, now is the acceptable time. Look closely. Today is the future. Not to accept the grace of God in vain. All right, I'm going to read through these one more time. As we work together with him, we urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. For he says, at an acceptable time, I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation, I have helped you. See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation. Look closely at the present you are constructing. It should look like the future you are dreaming. All right. Reflecting on how God is speaking to you with these words this morning, I invite you to take a minute of silence. Okay. Using the chat feature, if you could share how God is speaking to you through these words this morning. I think I might have missed some earlier. Now is the day of salvation. Future you are dreaming, grace of God. Both passages link today or now with the future. Now is the day of salvation. The present should look like the future you are dreaming. Is the present I am constructing acceptable? Look like the future you are dreaming. All right. If there are no more responses, I'm going to end my screen share and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Marchand. So thank you, Dr. Marchand, for being with us today.
Of course, thank you. It's good to see some returning faces and some new faces that I didn't see last Sunday, but I'm very happy to be here. So good morning to you all. I'm going to go ahead and now share my screen. So everyone can hear me, see me, right? Good, I'm seeing some nods. Let me make sure you all see my slides. All right. So, as Sarah had introduced me, my name is Axia Marchand, and I am an assistant professor at Rhodes College in psychology and educational studies. I'm in my second year, so I just moved to Memphis in 2019 from the University of Michigan. That was where I was getting my PhD. So I'm just going to set out our agenda for today. So I'm going to do a bit of a review from last Sunday, just to sort of refresh in our minds some of the topics that we discussed, and also for those of you who didn't join us, just to know what we talked about. We're going to talk about the myth of meritocracy. We talked a lot about whether education was the great equalizer last week. So we'll talk about, what does that look like? Is it really the great equalizer? What are these sort of dominant perspectives? I'm going to give 6 examples of how racial inequity presents itself in public schools. Of course, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's just 6 examples, and we can talk further through those or talk about other ones if you would like. I'll talk about what I'm doing. I had mentioned that I'm doing some work here in Memphis with a nonprofit called Whole Child Strategies. And I love the quotes that you all are using. So the Alice Walker and the Toni Morrison one from last week, and I'll leave you with 2 of my favorite ones as well. Okay. So just a review, last week we spoke about a lot. So the fact that education is not mentioned in the Constitution, it's sort of left into the hands of the states. When we were talking about desegregation in the 1950s and the 1960s, we spoke about the 1954 decision, Brown versus Board of Education. So basically, if we rewind to 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson basically said that segregation was legal as long as facilities and things like that are equal. However, in 1954, it was decided that actually segregated schools are inherently unequal. So that was the beginning.
Marcia, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. I think we cannot see your screen.
Oh, really?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, I see that it says sharing is paused, and I didn't see the chat. So I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. I hate interrupting people. Earlier.
I only see a couple of people's faces, so I wasn't like picking up on any, body language or anything like that. So is that better?
Oh, there we go. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay. Well, then you didn't see my last slide, but really all it said was this. So it was just going through the agenda that I was saying. Okay. So anyways, here we go. This is where I was. So I was mentioning Plessy versus Ferguson and how that brought us to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision. Okay. So the argument was made off of the 14th Amendment saying that these inherently unequal schools were depriving students of this equal protection that the 14th Amendment stated. So now, historical parallel, we also ended by talking about the merger and the demerger here in Shelby County in 2013 and 2014. So I actually found a research article recently that did not only talk about Shelby County, but also talked about 7 other school districts in the South and how these new redistricting and the boundaries actually contribute to about 70% of segregated schools in the last couple of years, okay? So these secessions have also had serious economic impacts, especially when it's the areas with a high tax base that are separating from a less affluent area. Okay, so we talked about how school funding is based off of property taxes and how that's also an inequitable sort of way. So I just wanted to leave you with this headline, which says, study finds carving up school districts worsen segregation. And this is just from last year. So this is something that is not unique to us locally, but it's sort of happening in the South, it seems like more so. Okay, so getting to that, I'm going to talk about this great equalizer myth. So the thought question for last Sunday was, in your experiences, has education actually looked like this great equalizer? And if we're to believe that, we also have to believe that there's equal opportunity. And that puts a lot of the focus on the individual to say, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, that whole mentality, without this acknowledgement of these oppressive social forces that actually are really playing a role in public education, okay? So as we had seen, a lot of these resources remain unequally distributed. I had put up a map in my slides from last Sunday that it shows how school funding varies so widely across the nation, right? So that's just one example of how these resources are unequally distributed. And as I had mentioned, it creates this pull yourself up from your bootstraps mentality. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. actually said, one of his quotes is, "It is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he should lift himself up by his own bootstraps. It is even worse to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps when someone is standing on his boot." Okay, so in many ways, this is, a dominant sort of perspective, a dominant paradigm that many, believe. But when we look at actually how the resources are spread, it is very unequal. And this rests on a sort of assumption that there is equal opportunity. So now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to present sort of 6 examples of how this actually plays out in public education. So the first one, and we touched on this a little bit last week, was teachers who don't look like their students. So after Brown versus Board of Education, many Black teachers lost their jobs, right? So we reviewed sort of this Rosenwald schools paradigm. So Rosenwald schools were schools in the South that were made specifically to educate Black students. So Black teachers, 100% Black demographic within the school building. And that was under the sort of like separate but equal, right? Separate but equal was, sort of oft with Brown versus Board of Education. Many Black teachers lost their jobs because the idea there was that Black teachers shouldn't be able to educate white students. So now if we're looking, this is actually a very recent statistic. For the first time in history, public schools in America serve mostly children of color. So if we look, about 49% of students who are enrolled in public schools are white. And if we see, it's predominantly students of color, with Hispanic or Latinos making up 26% of the public school population, and Black or African American students making up 15%. Okay, so really, the rhetoric is, calling students minorities is sort of a misnomer, right? Because what we usually had thought of to be the minority student are actually now the majority. Okay, so this, however, is what Shelby County Schools looks like. So this is from 2 years ago, but in many ways we are unique. We don't really match what the nationwide statistics look like. Shelby County Schools is predominantly Black. So 75% of students who are enrolled in Shelby County Schools are Black. And if we look, there's only 7% of students who identify as white. Okay, and we discussed reasons for that last class. I want to say last class, that's very much my teacher self, last session. But it's, white flight to private schools. It was also part of the demerger after, in Germantown, Arlington, all of those municipalities became their own school district. So I know this is a lot, so I just want you to, follow with me. So in the red square at the top, we have 3 comparisons between just, Shelby County Schools in the middle, and I just chose 2 of those municipalities that became their own school districts. So we have Bartlett on the left and Germantown on the right. And at the very top in the red box, we just see some of the different sizes, right? So like, let's focus on that first. Bartlett has a little bit less than 9,000 students. Germantown has a little bit less than 6,000 students. Shelby County is educating over 100,000 students, right? And when we're looking at that, we also see the proportion in teachers, right? So more than 7,000 teachers in Shelby County schools when we only have a couple hundred in both of those other areas. And if we look towards the bottom, it just sort of represents what we saw on the last slide as well. Shelby County is predominantly, very highly students of color who identify as non-white, whereas when we look at Germantown and Bartlett, that percentage is much, much smaller. Okay. So moving forward, just another way to look at this, because I know this was a question that some people asked last week. These first 2 columns, the one on the left is all districts in Tennessee. Okay, the whole state, sort of what teacher demographics look like statewide. So it looks like to me about maybe 15% Black teachers statewide, and a large majority of teachers identify as white. Now for Shelby County, that looks very different, right? And that can be because of Memphis's demographics, because of the student population in Shelby County. So we see that it is, maybe about 65%, right? So much lower than that 92% figure that we saw of the percentage of students in Memphis that identify as Black. And I know it's going to be a lot, but I just also pulled the data for all of those other municipalities as well, right? So you can take a quick look, and I can always put this slide back up. But if we're looking, Arlington, Bartlett, Collierville, Germantown, Lakeland, all have very low numbers of Black teachers. Millington a bit higher, and the Achievement School District, I don't know how many folks are familiar with this. It is a sort of separate school district that was created for the historically lowest performing schools. And that actually is statewide. So this column has some schools in Memphis, some schools in Nashville, some schools all around the state. But those schools, remember, correlation, not causation, are often highly, students of color. So accordingly, there's, a larger proportion of teachers of color there as well. Okay. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. The second point that I wanted to make that sort of exemplifies some of these disparities are that students of color are disciplined more than their white counterparts. So in 2015, 2016, so about 4 years ago, it was found, and we saw this statistic in a couple slides ago, even though Black students are just 15% of the nationwide population in public schools, they accounted for 45% of all the days lost due to suspension, and 31% of students referred to law enforcement or arrested in schools. Okay, so this is what we mean by disproportionate, right? So if it were proportionate, it would be, about 15% of students would be referred to law enforcement or arrested, right? Because it would match the larger proportion of that population. But what we're seeing are these disproportionate numbers. And this is just a visual that shows this. So on the left, we see that Black boys are suspended at a rate 3 times higher than white boys, and Black girls are suspended at a rate 6 times that of white girls in public schools. Okay. And if we're looking here specifically in Tennessee, Black girls are 3 times more likely. So that's how we shape up in this. Okay. But we have to ask why. And a huge reason for this is because people generally view Black boys as older and less innocent, starting even at the age of 10, right? And this is something that's been in the news, especially with police brutality. I know, for example, with Mike Brown and, police murders like that, oftentimes, they're not seen as youth. They're seen as, those more threatening, older, more dangerous, right? So that's the figures on Black boys. As for Black girls, they're seen as less innocent and more mature for their age, even from the ages of 5 to 14. So this is this concept of adultification, that they are not as innocent, that they are more sexually active, that they are more mature for their age, right? So this contributes to that disproportionate suspension, disproportionate discipline. So Philip Goff in 2014 said that our research found that Black boys can be seen as responsible for their actions at an age when white boys still benefit from the assumption that children are essentially innocent, right? So in schools that can look like, oh, XYZ student, he just really likes to talk or, play fight with his friends. That would be sort of this benefit of the doubt that might be given to a white student, whereas maybe for a Black student, it's seen as more aggressive and it's something that's maybe reprimanded or written up at a rate that's higher than, their white counterparts. So that's sort of a quick explanation of this disproportionate rate of discipline in schools. Okay. And this also links to the fact that there are not many school psychologists and counselors in many of these schools, but there are plenty of in-school police officers. Okay, so the ACLU put out these statistics at the summer. So especially after the murders of George Floyd, we started to think about policing in general and even policing in schools. So what we see here is that 1.7 million students are in schools with cops, but no counselors. 3 million students are in schools with cops, but no nurses. 6 million students are in schools with cops, but no school psychologists. And 10 million students are in schools with cops, but no social workers. Okay, so just thinking about the support that's found in these schools, you know, in many ways, it's school resource officers who are there and that are present, but not this sort of other types of supports that are necessary. And if we're looking at the statistic from, you know, right now, contemporary and in comparison to 1975, in 1975, there was about 1% of schools that were patrolled by police officers, whereas now 48% of schools employ them. So I do want to, you know, explain that a lot of this increase is due to sort of school shootings, and this number really rocketed after Columbine. However, I do want to show that this also disproportionately affects Black students, even though in some ways it was implemented as sort of a safety measure, okay? So if we look at this visual, we see how Tennessee shapes up. So we have a ratio of 417 to 1, and that's the number of students per counselor, okay? And when I looked up what the sort of ideal ratio is, it's 250 to 1, okay? So, you know, quite a few more students per each counselor for the whole state of Tennessee. And we can imagine that's the whole state of Tennessee. I don't have figures on Memphis, but I would argue that our numbers are probably much worse, especially because we are a predominantly Black district. And if we're looking at this figure 806 to 1, that is the ratio of nurses to students in the state of Tennessee. And when I looked up the ideal number of nurse to student ratio, it varies widely. So I saw 750 to 1 in a general population, all the way to 1-on-1 if, you know, students who have a need, they require a nurse, right? So that's counselors and that's nurses, but this visual shows the number of school resource officers. So let me sort of acquaint you with what we're looking at. So the y-axis, so the height of these columns, represent the percentage of public schools with at least one full-time school resource officer. And then as we look horizontally, it represents the percentage of students who are non-white. So looking at the column that is all the way to the right, in schools where there are 50% or more students who identify as non-white, those are the schools that see the largest number of school resource officers, okay? So yes, safety measure, but also disproportionately sort of found in schools that are predominantly Black or students of color, okay? And really, this contributes to this phenomenon called the school to prison pipeline. So if you're not familiar, it's a national trend that sort of funnels students out of public schools and into the criminal and juvenile justice systems, okay? Many of you know, I think those of you who were on the call on Sunday, I was a public school teacher in Miami-Dade County Public Schools in Florida, Miami, Florida. And I had once heard a statistic of the state determines how many prisons they need to build based off of how many students don't pass third grade state examinations. So there is a correlation between school progress, school achievement, and the number of sort of prisons that states believe that are necessary, okay? Okay, so the fourth example that I want to make is that of tracking. So tracking is also called ability grouping, but it's sort of the sorting of students into different groups or classes according to their perceived intellectual ability. And the word that I want to really sort of emphasize there is perceived, okay? So this can range from, students who are in college-bound courses to students who sort of get funneled into these vocational skills classes. And this can be, another example are students who are, enrolled in gifted and talented education, or those who are in need of more remedial education. Okay, so this phenomenon of tracking contributes to within school segregation. So we've talked a lot about, school segregation, this school in comparison to this school, but even within a school, we can see a phenomenon that looks like this. So on the left-hand side, we can see, this school and the students that identify there. And if we see, it's pretty equal. It looks like there's an equal amount of Black students and an equal amount of white students. But what actually happens due to tracking is that if we're looking at the right-hand side of the visual now, the students who are on the high track are predominantly white. And as we go down to these more sort of lower tracked or remedial classes, those classes tend to be predominantly students of color. Okay, so that's why even when we're looking at these percentages of, the demographics of schools, we also have to understand how this might look in the school building. And because of racialized tracking, it often looks like this. Okay, so imagine these are the honors, these are the AP, these are the IB. So we're now looking to see what students have access to those sorts of courses. And going back to last slide, I wanted you to focus on the fact that this is sort of a perceived evaluation, right? I can tell my story a little bit. I remember in second grade, my teacher was just like, oh, IEXA should be tested for gifted and talented education, right? But if I hadn't had that teacher who said maybe she should be, in this higher track, I maybe would have never been tested, right? And maybe my next year's teacher would have said, oh, actually, IEXA needs to be in a remedial course, right? So a lot of it is very much so based on a teacher perception, okay? All right, so tracking continued. So a recent study of looking at urban school districts suggested that some districts use tracking to sort of stop this white flight, right? So we talked about white flight, especially right after Brown versus Board of Education, where here in Memphis, many white families opted to put their students into private schools. Well, some urban districts are saying, actually, keep your students in these private school or these public schools rather, and we'll give them the opportunity to take these, higher tracked courses. Okay. And what happens is that those lower tracked classes end up receiving fewer resources. That's where they usually place teachers who are less experienced. So it's this cyclical thing where those lower tracked courses that have predominantly students of color, receive less resources. Students might be frustrated or, just their morale lessens, and then it becomes this cyclical thing. Okay, so there are some really lived consequences for the students who are placed in those courses. And a recent study by a political scientist also found that when districts have more Black teachers, the number of Black students in special education or those lower tracked classes declines, right? So that goes back to that importance of having teachers that understand sort of the experience of being a Black student in schools and who understands these phenomenon and these statistics of how this plays out. Okay, so tracking is my fourth point. If we move on to the fifth point is the curriculum, right? So in many ways, we see that the curriculum is whitewashed. And by that, I mean that it does not really tell the truth of the atrocities that Black, Indigenous, and people of color have experienced. And in addition, it makes it seem as if the civil rights movement just sort of ended racism and now everyone lives happily ever after. I mean, that is often the way history books are written. History is written by those who are the victors, right? So we don't really have many textbooks, and maybe this is something that is changing more, but that are actually being honest about this, right? And in addition, it's not culturally relevant or responsive to the lived experiences of students of color. And one recent example of this, I don't know how many of you can see it, but it's a picture of the Southeast United States, and the caption says, "The Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and the 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations." So I saw, workers. I think I saw Melissa sort of put air quotes up, and it's exactly it, right? So imagine, your child is learning this at school, and this is specifically an example that happened in Texas, and there's a lot of explanation for this, right? Who's writing the textbooks, who's making the money off of the textbooks. We can sort of do a whole like cause analysis of that. But really, this is what we mean by a whitewash curriculum. So can you imagine if, you're a Black student and your parents have told you sort of the realities of the transatlantic slave trade, and then you get to school and you open your book and it says that? Well, you're not going to feel, that your experience is told in a truthful light, and that can lead, to disidentification with school, and it can have long-lasting impacts, right? So that's sort of the psychology of what I study, of how these things can affect, how students identify with school and how they come to the school prepared to learn. Okay, so this is an example of that sort of whitewash curricula that I mentioned. And then finally, the lack of access to advanced placement opportunities. And this goes hand in hand with what I had mentioned a second ago with tracking. Okay, so oftentimes Black students aren't given the same opportunities as their white peers are. And in my intro, I think maybe not today, but last week, Sarah mentioned that I teach statistics. And this is often data that I share with my students. So I know this is a lot of numbers, so also bear with me. This is just a subsample of some high schools in Shelby County, okay? And what I did is I chose the ones that have a population of above 90% Black students, but that also have above 90% free or reduced price lunch. And I had mentioned that free or reduced price lunch is often a proxy for poverty, right? And I want to show you how many AP courses are available to students who attend those schools. And then at the bottom, I just sort of, it's in alphabetical order until we get to the bottom. I just sort of copied and pasted Germantown and White Station at the bottom to show how vastly different that is, right? So if we're looking at the demographics of that school, very different. And if we're looking at the number of AP courses that are available at those schools, very different, right? So 35 AP courses at Germantown, 19 at White Station, in comparison to, a student who goes to Melrose, where they might only have the opportunity to take one AP class in all 4 years in high school. Okay. And the reason why this is important is because, this ties exactly into how students come to college. A student who graduates from White Station might be able to come to college with, I don't know, 19 if they took every course and got college credit, which could reduce the amount of tuition they have to pay. They could graduate early. Like, it also has long-standing consequences as well. You can imagine how expensive it is to go to college in this day and age. So even the cost savings that can happen from attending, a school that offers 0 versus a school that offers 35. Okay. So as I had mentioned earlier, these 6 are not, oh, actually, pause. Sorry, I never know what is my next slide. So this is actually a photo, and I did not take this photo, but many of you might know Dr. Kendra Holtz, who's also at Rhodes with me, and she shared this photo with me. So she's an avid biker, and she said that one day she was biking in front of Shelby County School Board's office, and she saw some tents, and she inquired about what was happening. And basically what this is that it was the day that the optional application was due. So parents in Shelby County camped out to ensure that their students could enroll their children into optional schools. And when I say optional schools, in many other places, it would be a magnet. And White Station is an example of an optional school. So in order to get your child into White Station with the opportunity to take 19 AP classes, many parents were camping out to make sure that they had the opportunity to get their child's application in. So Dr. Holtz shared this with me because I was sort of telling her about, the disproportionality in these schools. And she was like, I have a photo for you. So this is courtesy of her, but this is exactly what we see. So I think right there on like Hollywood, parents are literally camping. And my research really focuses, and I'll talk about this in a little while, is parent involvement. And, when I think about who these parents are who are able to take a day off of work or, not work full time and be able to sort of do this for their children, oftentimes it's not Black parents who might have, shift work or not be able to get, paid time off to go ahead and do this for their children and access an opportunity that isn't, equitable or, given to everyone. Okay. So as I mentioned, these 6 are not exhaustive. These are just sort of 6 that I, you know, chose to go into a little bit more depth with. So this is just a bit of a summary, but I wanted to share a little bit of what I do and what I focus on. So I focus my work using 2 theories. So critical race theory is just a theory that, well, let me not say just. So it's a theory that originated in critical legal studies, but basically it is asserting that there is structural racism, right? And this is defined as patterns where societal institutions create benefits for some and burdens for others on a consistent, systematic, ongoing basis. And how I utilize this in my work is to shift this lens from a deficit view of Black parents instead to the assets and strengths that they individually possess, sort of shifting the explanation of why things occur to the systemic. Okay. And I also use critical consciousness. And this theory is defined as an awareness and analysis of racial, social, political, and economic disparities that we've covered, and the understanding of which, in order to act to, redress these oppressive forces that we see in society. So this actually reminds me a lot of the quote from today, the Alice Walker quote, because the critical reflection to me is sort of the understanding of the present moment, right? And the critical action is that future. So how are you going to act, right? So the critical reflection is understanding structural versus individual. So is it that Black students really just don't enroll in AP courses, or is it because structurally they don't have the opportunities to, because the schools that they are, predominantly enrolled in don't have that opportunity, right? So it's sort of understanding how are we critically thinking about these disparities that we are facing. So, for example, the critical reflection for me is how are Black parents thinking about these racial inequities? What are their perceptions of their ability to make change? And then what is it they are actually doing? Okay. And I had interviewed 20 Black parents when I was still in Michigan. And just 2 examples I'll give is that parents are engaging in very traditional ways, right? So this mother says, I make sure that I regularly go into the parent portal that the school has to look at his grades, his assignments, and things like that, just so I can double check behind him. So, very normal sort of parent involvement kind of behaviors. But then I spoke to Erica, who said, because I feel like for African American students, I think that people and educators sometimes think we don't care sometimes. And I feel like my visibility shows my passion for my son's education. And he has a parent that's going to push him as hard as you're pushing him. When we're not visible, I feel like it's just, that's what people think. So Erica is sort of talking about how she, recognizes that there's this stereotype of like Black parents who aren't present. So that makes her feel like she has to sort of go above and beyond and be visible, right? So that's the work that I have done and continue to do. And now here in Memphis, I work with Whole Child Strategies, which is a nonprofit, and they largely focus on the out of school factors, so community factors that influence parents' ability and students' ability to enroll in school, show up in school every day, ready to learn, right? So they tackle problems in Memphis such as transportation, equal access to housing. And before I joined the team, they had interviewed many stakeholders, and they came up with these themes of parents are feeling alienated. There's no one definition for parent engagement. These shifting structures, the merger and demerger were mentioned. that's sort of causing this confusion, and that parent engagement is important. So I know this is a lot of text, but I'm just showing that even before I joined the team, so this is in 2017, they were doing this work in Memphis with Black parents. And what they've done is they've created this framework with 5 pillars. And these are African symbols, so Adinkra symbols from Ghana that represent sort of what they've heard from the parents. And the goal is that we have these schools that are implementing these principles. So those are our family-centered schools. And we're sort of in the pilot process to see, what that looks like. So this is just a quick overview of what I'm currently up to. But I know that this is a lot, so I'm just gonna end with 2 of the quotes that I really think guide my work, and they're important to me. So this is Ijeoma Oluo, and she wrote a book called So You Want to Talk About Race? And this was on a lot of sort of anti-racist book lists, but she says, the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself, and that's the only way forward. And lastly, Angela Davis, who is, a well-known activist, academic, scholar, author, she says, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, but we must be anti-racist. So I will leave you with those 2 quotes, but I will stick around. I know there was a movement in the chat, but I wasn't really paying attention. So I will chat with you all and answer any questions if you have.
Dr. Marchand, thank you so much. We're in the middle of Meltdown City over here, so I'm sorry.
Oh.
But she just invited you to ask some questions. So please do any clarifying questions while we've got her here.
And thank you to all of you who put some resources into the chat. That's really great.
I have a question about Stand for Children. Do you know much about them, and how do you feel about their advocacy? The church belongs to a group, MICA, that Interfaith Coalition for Action and Hope, and we've kind of aligned. There's a whole big part of our work is around education, and we've aligned directly with Stand for Children. I just wondered if you had ideas about them, positive or negative.
I don't. So I've heard of the name, and I know that they do work in the community. I feel like I haven't been in the community long enough to know exactly. So I appreciate the question, but I would just like, as I look at organizations, like for example, Whole Child Strategies is the one that I feel like align with. And the reason why I align with them is because they are thinking of the out of school factors, right? So there's this understanding that the community and, access to transportation and housing and jobs, all of that affects students, right? So it's hard to come to school prepared to learn if you, had to catch the bus at, 4 a.m. to get to school across town or things like that. So I really sort of, align and really give a lot of respect to the institutions and the organizations that recognize those connections.
It's all good.
Thank you,
Marchand.
Martha. Hi, Mary. Yes.
The Whole Child Institute, did you say?
Whole Child Strategies.
Strategy, pardon me. What type of relationship or what type of welcoming, if any, has Shelby County Schools given to that? Are you in active partnership to implement those goals?
Yes, so that's a great question. So Whole Child Strategies actually got a nationwide fellowship through the Flamboyant Foundation, which is in DC. So that was sort of what funded their ability to create that framework that I showed. And on the team, there's a lot of different folks. So there's, I'm the professor from Rhodes. We have professors from the University of Memphis. We have people who work for Shelby County on the team. We also have a school board member. So the school board member has sort of helped us to present at the school board. So this was a proposal, I believe it was I feel like it's either pandemic or pre-pandemic. It was definitely pandemic. But I remember being at a school board where we presented our framework and saying, you know, this is the work that we're doing in these select schools. And I know that the long-term goal is to eventually get this to, you know, the state legislator and say, is there sort of a way that schools can opt into, you know, having the stamp of I am a family-centered schools, because we understand how important it is. We understand that it's not just solely coming to PTA meetings, coming to open house. You know, that's sort of the traditional way that we think about parent involvement, but it's really so much more. And it's listening to parent voice and trusting parents, and really, you know, partnering with them. So I hope that answers. Thanks, Mary. And I see Stephanie's hand.
What schools are you piloting in?
So we have a partnership. So one of the members of our team is Dr. Bobby White, and he has the Fraser Fraser Community Schools. So it's 3 of his schools, which are charter, and it's 2 Shelby County schools. It's Grandview and Springdale. So both in North Memphis. Whole Child Strategies work focuses on the Klondike Smoky City area, which is, you know, very close to Rhodes, but the demographics are very different. So, you know, if you just go west on Jackson, you'll drive straight through Klondike Smoky City area. Great question. Yes.
I thank you very much again. I would like
You're welcome.
to hope that we can follow up with Melissa's question about Stand for Children, because I do think that they look beyond just the school, the internal building, although they do have emphasis on facilities, because one of the tenets is facilities that are poor encourage children to be, I mean, they're disappointing for children. They're demoralizing. So, and they do work on the prison to pipeline that you mentioned very actively. There's a whole committee, and they lobby. So the director, Cardell Oren, is a person that I would love to see you connected with and help make that connection.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
It would be a nice interconnection for you, and then you can look at it and see if it's relevant as you see.
Okay. I know that Cardell has done some work with the executive director of Whole Child Strategies. Her name is Natalie McKinney. So maybe that already shows that they have similar sort of ideas about the work.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I also know that you all go into breakout rooms, so I don't want to take too much of your time. So I'm really just, you know, open.
That's all right, y'all. I think we are not going to do breakout rooms today. I'm kind of scrolling through to see if I see hands. You know, this is out of all of the topics that we've considered, I feel like this is probably one, not that I'm an expert at by any means, but I feel like out of all of the topics we've considered, this is probably the one that I know that I've done a little bit more reading on and know a little bit about. And that being said, I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, just having so many aha moments during this presentation, that just things that surprised me in a really challenging way. So I'm wondering if y'all also have had those moments, and if you just want to name them while I turn off my mic.
I'll tell you, to see that list of APs, I knew there was disparity in Shelby County. I had no idea that we had, you know, 8, 10 high schools with 0. And, you know, we have a lot of, it seems like a lot of, we know a lot of kids that go to Central and a lot of kids that go to White Station. And of course I didn't see Central on the list, but I know there's AP courses at Central. I was flabbergasted that there were literally 0 and 1 AP. I'm just shocked and saddened by that. I had no idea.
Could I add on to that as a teacher at Central? We actually do have, I think maybe we are equal to White Station and AP courses. So there's a lot of opportunity at Central. But as a former AP teacher, I taught AP European history for a couple of years. And this is, for me, the most stark example of inequity was the morning of the AP exam. And students are allowed to skip school. You know, the AP exam started at noon. And so they didn't have to come to school. They would just come to school in time to take the exam. And I started teaching at my normal time. And pretty soon my African-American students in my AP class start trickling into my classroom. They have nowhere to go because they don't have to go to class, but they've been dropped off at school because they can't stay at home. So I said, all right, so you can hang out in my classroom. And so, they were studying or practicing or resting or whatever. And pretty soon it was apparent that, the exam was to start at noon, and for many of them, there hadn't been plans for lunch. So about 10:30, 11:30, my white students start trickling in because they have cars. They could drive themselves to school. They've slept longer. They've had a good meal. A lot of them are holding Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts stuff that they had stopped to get. All wonderful kids. All of those students deserve to do as best as they can. But for me, that was a stark example. Who is going to probably have a better chance of doing
It's the same with the
better on
ACT
the exam.
and the SAT test, same exact thing.
One of your last slides talked about the confusion that came in, sort of disorientation for teachers with the merger, demerger. I'm not sure I feel that, because it was such a short merger, it just barely made an impact. And everybody knew from day one of the merger that they were just waiting out for a year to demerge. So, but I think what has been disorienting for everybody in the community are especially in certain communities where, like Fraser, where there are a whole cluster of charter schools, and they're different groups of charters. They're highly recruited. The schools go out and recruit door to door in the neighborhood. They might be better schools. They might have failed to be better schools. So then they come and go, and sometimes they're in the building of the longtime neighborhood school, and sometimes they're not. I just think people have lost a feeling of where their kids will go to school, and that seems just in my instinct is that that's not helpful.
Yeah, that's a good comment.
We shared this in our breakout group last week, but one of our godchildren attended Fairley, which was a Green Dot school, and he didn't graduate. He had to get a GED, and I took him to a tutor that is used by Hutchison and some other schools. I think she taught at Grace St. Luke's. And the first time, his first session, she met me at the door when I picked him up, and she said, he's a math brain. And the second session, she invited me to come in and sit with him. And she said to him in front of me, you can do anything in math that you choose to do. You can have any career you want. This child failed math at Green Dot, Fairley. And he got in the car with me and he said, I've never had a teacher like that. You can hear the anger and the hurt in my voice.
Gail, thank you for sharing that story. I'm going to let that be the last word that we take with us. Thank you. Aixa, thank you so much. Y'all, if we could just give a little visual sign of appreciation. Yeah, thank you. This has been really just informative and compelling. It's actually amazing to me how much you covered in a short amount of time. It was accessible, but it was also just incredibly thorough. So thank you. We really appreciate it. Y'all, I hope you will come back next week. We are doing Idlewild's Racial Roadmap Part 2. So we started this a couple weeks ago with Dr. Dr. Haynes, he talked about the sit-ins and Ottawild's kind of reactions to those sit-ins. We're kind of relearning this history with a little bit of nuance, and it's probably some of the most important work that we're doing in this class is examining our own kind of racial self, if you can do that, right, for a collective, for a body. So we're taking that concept with those racial roadmaps that individuals are doing, where we kind of unearth those key moments that were formative for us as individuals and forming our understandings of racial diversity and our own racial selves. And we're doing that as an institution, as a congregation. So we're looking at those moments through that lens. And Perry Magnus and Ann Apple are set to continue leading us through that journey next Sunday. So please do join us for that. It is 10:43. We've got worship soon, and I've gotten really lucky being able to talk here for about 20 seconds without my kids shrieking. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Y'all, thank you so much. Aixa, thank you so much for being with us. Y'all go in peace, and I'll see you later.